but then, hello.
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 How's it going?
Hey, how's it going, Doug? I'll start the.
Whoa, faces.
No faces? What are we doing?
Hold on a minute.
You guys are all no faces. All right.
I know. We're kind of well, yeah. Just because we're shy doesn't mean you have to be shy.
What's the standard? Yeah.
Depends. Maybe it depends on whether you showered that day or not. I don't know.
Yeah, exactly. That's a good idea. Well, you guys got a glimpse.
There you go. So hold on a minute. What is today? Today's 21st. So let me paste the link to the agenda doc. People can start adding their names to the list of attendees. Hopefully that's the right link.
Hey, Doug. How are you?
Hello. How's it going? Okay.
It's going good, thanks. Good to meet you in LA last week.
Yeah, it was good. I'm getting to the point now where I've seen your presentation so much, I may actually be able to give it myself one of these days.
That would be cool. Yeah. Just get the sign off from your boss at IBM somehow.
That's right. Yes, I'm sure my OpenWhisk counterparts will be very thrilled to hear that.
Yeah.
Let's see. So Kareem, you want to start sharing your screen? That way you can get ready for the demo while we're waiting for people to join?
Yeah, of course. How many meetings have you guys had so far?
I'm sorry, say that again?
I was asking how many meetings have you guys had so far?
Well, quite a few. If you look at the agenda doc, you can see all the meetings there. I don't know, I think maybe 20 or so. I think we've had maybe 3 or 4 demos though.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's recordings as well. Although
yes.
somebody needs to trim out all of the hellos and introductions at the beginning of them.
That's cool. Can you see my screen now?
Yes, we can.
Perfect.
All right. So let's give people just another 30 seconds to a minute or so to join, and then you can kick it off.
Sounds good.
Let's see. Okay, we'll wait till my clock says 4 past, then we'll get started. And one more time, for those people who missed it, here's a link to the agenda doc in the chat, so you can add your names to the attendee list. Okay, my clock says 12:04, so why don't we go ahead and get started. So first up today, we have a demo from Kareem, who's going to be presenting Clay, I believe. So you should be able to see it on the Zoom meeting. So go ahead and start.
Perfect. Yeah, thanks for having us. So I'm Kareem. I'm also with my co-founder, Nikolai, and we're both engineers on Clay. And I'll just give you a little bit of context about how we came to present at the meeting. So we're working on making it as easy as possible for developers to deploy serverless HTTP endpoints really quickly and without any configuration, and then for them to be able to share these functions with others publicly or within their various teams. You can think of it as GitHub meets Lambda or AWS Lambda in a way. And so as we're working on this, as part of this, we've been defining metadata about how to, all the information that we need about a function, creating a standardized function definition. We're working on service discovery within our product. And when we came across the working group's paper on serverless, we realized that we're thinking about very similar things. And so we wanted to contribute what we've learned and not duplicate some of the work that the community is doing to standardize how to name functions and how to get them up and running and find them. And so that's kind of how we found Doug, and I sent him a message, and so we wanted to kind of show you what Clay is about, and then discuss a little bit of the work that we've been doing around the standardization. And then we can tell you a little bit about some of the next steps that we think we can help with the working group. So with that, let me just kind of give you a quick overview of what Clay is. So Clay is a way to put up code really quickly, as I mentioned, and I'll show you two things. So first, let me just start off by showing you how we create a function, and then I will show you some of the ways in which we think people will use it. So when you log into Clay, you get a list of all the services that you've created, and then you can also see categories of functions that people have put into various groupings. And here we have the groupings around different companies. So all the functions around getting started working with Slack or Clearbit or Cloudinary. And I'll just show you now how to create a function really quickly. So in order to create a function, all you need to do is give it a name. So working group function. And you don't have to specify anything extra for a function in Clay. So you don't have to, tell it which provider you're sending it to, or what the size, what memory it requires. And you don't have to connect it with an API gateway. It's basically, we've done, all of those choices for you, so you get up and running as quickly as possible. And then the things that we've added around that is that we have some metadata around what parameters every function expects. And we do some, we help developers get started really quickly setting up what their function definition looks like so that they can start coding around that. So now that we've created this function, you can see it exists at this URL, exec.clay.run, with my username and then the name of the function. And so you can really quickly install our Clay client in Node and be able to call that function by just saying clay.run, Korean Clay WG function, or you can curl it in terminal. So you can add, we have a set of parameters that we've set up that you can add. So you can add a text box, a Boolean box, an address. We also have the ability to upload a file, which makes it much easier to handle, writing code around file uploads. But this is how, getting into the meat of it, when you set up a function on Clay, we create like a little editor in the cloud where you can edit the code directly. So this is just a little bit of help around how we've set it up. But really all you need to know is that you get an event with some variables that are passed to it, whether you've hit it as a post or a get, you get them in the same way. And then you have two functions, done and error. And done takes in a JSON object that it returns with 200 OK, and error would allow you to return whatever error code you want with a JSON object. I heard someone might have had a question.
Yeah, if you check the chat, someone's asking what the backend is for this.
So we basically send them to, right now, we send them to AWS Lambda and Google Cloud Functions, but we're kind of set it up to abstract away from any of the cloud providers. So, even if it's a Kubernetes stack in the background, it might be that in the end we'll allow people to run it in their own infrastructure, but for now we kind of manage where it goes.
Another question. How do you, what would you compare yourself to, like replacing like serverless framework or like function router? Do you see, are there any services that do something similar, or what do you do that's unique, you think?
Yeah, I mean, we think of it as different from like the serverless framework is in the sense that serverless is all about, it's an open source framework where people can, it makes it easier to interact with Google Cloud Functions and Amazon, and also abstracts away the specific details of using each provider. We're more about like letting developers find especially other pieces of code and get started from that really quickly. And in order to do that, we also have a very simple experience where you don't have to think about where your code really is. So I'll show you a quick example of how that works. So I'll just go to this explore page. we're building these categories of different functions in different categories around specific SaaS providers that exist. And so if you wanted to get started writing code with GitHub's API really quickly, instead of going and setting up your local environment and then figuring out how to push that up into prod, you would just find something that is approximately what you want. So in this case, one of our users, Steve, built a little function that gets project data from GitHub, and you can instantly try running this. So I'll just run it against one of our repos. So you can test out what this function does. You can see that it returns the data, this particular data. And if you think this is a good starting point for yourself, you can click fork and make a copy of this function instantly to your account. And then you can start editing that code right there and publish it. So basically the way that we think people will use this is one, to interact, to build on top of existing APIs really quickly, and then share these reusable building blocks with the world. So we have like a new API that gets medium user posts, which doesn't exist today, but it's something that others would find useful. And then two, we're also thinking of it as a way so that's kind of the extending existing SaaS products with APIs on top of their APIs. And then the second one is we have an embed feature where you can write some code and then you can embed it into a blog post. So it's a way for others to learn and share little pieces of backend code in the world. So right now it's kind of like, you've seen CodePen for front-end work. We're thinking of this as CodePen for backend code.
So one question I have, it's Yaron, you mentioned about being able to work with different cloud providers. So Google and Amazon may be a bit similar, but with Azure, for example, events is something else, it's sort of more structured and derived from a variety of sources and all that. So how do you plan on abstracting those differences?
Yeah, we haven't really looked in depth at Azure at this point in time to kind of look at the differences, but the concept would be to have some sort of mapping. I mean, that's why we're interested also in like working with the working group, just to see where the thinking is in terms of what the standardization is moving towards around events and around function signatures.
Yeah, and I think, just to add to that, the way we're thinking of it is that each, like we have our own current model today where you get the event, which is parsed from, the expectation is that you hit this URL as an HTTP post, and then we pass those variables into our event variable. So we're thinking of these serverless functions as HTTP endpoints exclusively at the moment. And so all of our events are just JSON objects. So we're not really thinking of them, how do you use them within your own, like infrastructure with a set of events coming in of like, oh, the database got updated and now you should do this. We're more at a higher level of abstraction than that for now.
But isn't it limiting the use case? Don't you want to look at, like streaming or other events?
Yeah, of course. I mean, we're kind of limiting the use case on purpose just as a starting point. And like the positioning that we have is like, this is a really fast way to put code up in the cloud without thinking and doing it around like a very specific set of use cases initially, and then starting to expand potentially with, something that would hold events and then call the functions as needed. So we want to just get a little bit of usage first before we expand the set of use cases.
I do like the UI. I think this looks really clean, and especially the idea of having the catalog. I think that's something that a lot of different projects are looking at. I guess with abstracting everything away, there is still a cost to pay, and whether the choices that you've made are actually going to suit everybody's needs is another question, I guess. So that's something that at some point in your story you might need to think about.
Yeah, one thing that I should show you as well is that, we found it really frustrating to work with Lambda's logs currently. And so we started to do a few things around that might be interesting. And it's a little bit because we can control the UI and we're controlling kind of the experience here. So, for example, if I just type, console.log event bars here, I don't know why it's lagging. Just 1 second. Or if you make an error, so let me just refresh this page for a second. We've done a few things that are nice, I think, which are trying to show you the errors quickly. So if I try to access, let's say a variable that doesn't exist, we should see that instantly. So we can highlight the error in the code. We can tell you that this was, that it's undefined. So we can help people start to write code in the serverless way really quickly because we control the whole experience. And another thing that's interesting, as part of just making the coding experience really simple, we do things where in Node, for example, you don't even need to add the dependencies. If you type underscore, it'll add that immediately. So you can't make mistakes in certain ways within this framework. And it's all about, the way we think about it is how do we improve the developer user experience and how do you use these advances in infrastructure technology like serverless to improve the dev user experience around a limited set of use cases for now.
So is this open source?
So this is not open source, but we have like an open source CLI that uses it. And we're starting to think about which parts of this we can open source, like which part of this is our IP and which things we can just openly share with the community. That's part of why we wanted to discuss this with you and see like maybe we can participate and have the function definition open source. We can make it so that if you want to use like Clay and run it in, run a version of this yourself, it can all be open source. And if you just want to use our hosted service for convenience, that's what we'll charge for in the future. So we're still in the early stages and thinking about how to which parts can be made available to the community.
All right. This is very, very cool. Any other questions, comments?
Yeah. So you're showing us a Node.js experience right now. Is that kind of where serverless ends for you, or do you support Python and Docker images and other things?
Yeah, we haven't done that yet, but we've been thinking about it and designing it with that in mind, that we don't want to be on a single language. We just thought this would be a really fast way to test this out and see if we can create a really great experience around that. Part of one thing that might not have been super clear in my demonstration so far is that one of the things that we're pretty excited about is that a lot of these, the fact that you can have these little functions means that people can share almost like these templates, even if they require private parameters like, private keys and stuff, that we can allow you to get started with those functions quickly. So one example I could show you really quickly here is, we were working with Cloudinary and creating functions that would, for example, accept an image and then using AWS's image recognition, run some analysis on that and tag it and then upload it. So that's kind of a useful feature for their developers so that they have this new almost combined API that they can make available and have us build a community around their APIs where developers, create these useful functionality on top of it. And this function requires private parameters to work. And so if I was not logged in, just show you this quickly. If I wasn't logged in and I saw that this was a useful function and I wanted to create my own version, when you click fork to create or use, let me just show you this. Oh, we're on my local box. I'll just use production. So when you click fork to use, it identifies all the API keys that are necessary for this function to be used. And if you're able to enter them, or in the future, hopefully we'll be able to enter them for you if you're storing them with us, then you can get started creating things really quickly and not have to, even do any setup or worry about where your keys are, how you're going to set them up. So just to go back to that earlier question of like, how are we different than serverless or other frameworks that exist? We're basically a way where we're not saying here's a simpler way to configure the system. We're saying this is a full dev experience around how to create these functions, and all you have to do is write the code. You don't have to worry about anything.
And I guess particularly around just like making it easy to work with like products and services and APIs that you already have out there.
Yeah, rather than your internal infrastructure.
Yeah, just want to kind of agree with people who've said before, it looks absolutely stunning. I just had a question about sort of what level of kind of operational information can get bubbled up, like metrics and sort of like audit logs for function invocations and so on.
Yeah, so we're just essentially streaming the logs that are coming from the existing cloud providers with like a little bit of cleaning up of just like what their syntax is, but we're like, you have access to the same things that you would have on the sort of existing cloud provider. So, we've just Lambda logs, for example, have been really frustrating for us as we've been coding. So we've tried to make that a little bit better. But we're really just like parsing the objects essentially that are there just to show them a little bit nicer, and then like giving you the same stuff that you would have there anyways.
You can see an example here. This is a function that I've used a little bit and logged a few things. And so right now, we just showed the logs, but we're showing you like the raw logs if we can't parse them. If we can detect that, in the future, we'll say, hey, this is, JSON blob, we're going to show it to you in this way. And we're working on making that experience, like the code publish, debug loop, we're trying to figure out how to make that as fast as possible. But everything is live instantly. And, for us, instead of doing things like versioning and thinking of what are the different stages, like is this a dev environment, is this a test environment, we just have this one concept of forking as a catch-all. So if you want to create a new function, you just click fork and you name it whatever you want.
And I guess around like the open source stuff, right? Like the things that we could see being helpful to have is like, what's like a good way to define what the inputs to a function are, right? Like right now we have this kind of like metadata where we're saying, hey, here's the parameters that are there. And while we haven't done it yet, that like provides the opportunity in the future to do really nice things like being able to like provide validation on that function, for example, so that like the developer doesn't have to, go in and like write all the validation code themselves. That's something that like various platforms, if there's like a consistent type system around that, could start to provide.
Yeah, and you could also do things like search for a function by the inputs that it takes. Yeah. And these inputs could also be tied to various services.
Yeah, if you check the event, mapping doc, you'll see that one of the suggestions would to have sort of a schema for the body message, potentially something like Avro schema or something else, which is sort of very simple.
Yeah, we were just taking a look at that, and that's kind of really interesting to us. And where we've started an effort where we have a repo, and we're trying to basically create a library of all the events that various services send as webhook from their webhooks. And it's almost like one of the things we wanted to do is if you're writing some code to, for example, handle a webhook, we wanted to be able to autocomplete against various object properties that you should expect to receive, and to be able to help you understand what kind of things this webhook will expect to make that experience better. And so we started to look at like a schema around like how should events look like, and we noticed that you're already working on it.
And that we'll put up, we've had it private, but we'll put up this like, hey, here's like a folder of like all the objects that we've kind of collected so far. because that's probably useful to other people as well.
All right. Well, I'm going to have to call time on this, even though it's very, very cool, and I'd actually love to see more, and I'll be playing with it. But we need to move on to the doc. But I want to thank you guys for presenting, and I would love it if you guys could stick around, not just for today's call, but for other phone calls. And if you have any input on the white paper that we're working on, we'd love to get your input on that as well.
Of course. Yeah, we really appreciate that. Thanks for your time.
All right, cool. Thank you guys very much for presenting. That was really cool. All right, so let's switch back to the white paper itself. There are a couple of things that I wanted to discuss on today's call. First, when was the call? I guess it was Tuesday, the TOC call. There was a request. It may have been from Brian Grant. I can't remember for sure, but somebody was asking for a comparison of the kube-hosted functions as a service offerings that run on Kubernetes. I guess like Serverless, Fission, or some of the other ones. I can't remember all the names. He thought a comparison of those, assuming it's not too controversial, might be a good thing to add to the white paper. And so first I want to know whether people thought that was a good idea, and if so, if someone's willing to volunteer to write that up relatively quickly.
I would be slightly wary of doing that, Doug. The main reason is because of the velocity these projects are moving. A lot of them don't even have 1.0 yet. So while they may be stable enough to run with a production workload, they may not be stable in the way that their API is breaking and changing. I would be, I guess, worried that one of the frameworks, pick one, I don't know, OpenWhisk, didn't work with Kubernetes, and then the Red Hat work came through, and now it does. And people are looking at the document and thinking, oh, well, this is the one source of truth, and then we have to keep it up to date. I think what was good was where we have that summary section, and we said what our frameworks are doing. And I think that's something that probably covers some of it already.
Okay.
This is Chris Muns. I'm in agreement with Alex on this. I feel like there's so many projects that are popping up from different companies and different developers. There needs to be some sort of a bar for which ones you'd want to compare against, which ones you wouldn't. And it will be kind of an ever-growing list that might have, you might get a single organization that spins up some version of this, and then another organization spins up their own version of it. And so, like, how do you decide which ones of those are credible and which ones aren't?
Right. And I think this goes also to what we talked about last week or the week before. We've got that CNCF cloud native landscape. I think there was also an idea to do that for the storage working group as well as this. If anything, maybe it just copies that model, doesn't necessarily do a matrix comparison, but maybe it's just a view into the landscape of what's there that's regularly updated.
Okay. So
I think it can be valuable to have a table instead of each one of the project listing, just a couple of bullets, but maybe tables of which languages are supported, which sort of event sources, etc. We can create several categories, and then each project would list just like in a Wikipedia.
Well,
we kind of have that already at the end of a doc, and it's available on project homepages too. I think just want to reiterate what I said just now, and Chris Munn's kind of chimed in on, but I have to drop now, so I'd like to talk about this again, but I'm not sure that this list will be kept up to date or be accurate. That's the concern.
But right. What was the intent from Brian asking about it?
I think he just wanted people to be able to see how they compare to one another. It wasn't meant to be sort of a slam on anybody, but Chris, maybe you're on the call, you can talk to that.
Yeah, I mean, it was a specific request for Brian to compare the different Kubernetes focused solutions out there in serverless land. And also there was a desire from the TOC to have the different working groups come up with kind of essentially landscape versions of their communities, right? So in the chat, I linked to what the storage working group has kind of come up with, and if you go through it, there's a list of like interfaces, plugins, frameworks, tools, and so on with different categorizations. This is basically kind of what Brian and the TOC is expecting this working group to come up with. And I think you have a lot of that information already there in the white paper. It just needs to be distilled in a Google Sheet. And I think once you have it there, it's a little bit easy to constantly update. So that's it.
I guess I could put on a different hat and say that perhaps we shouldn't focus just on Kubernetes. I know that Brian may have said Kubernetes, but when I look at CNCF, it should be things outside of Kubernetes as well.
Right.
Right.
Yep.
I would agree with that.
Yeah, I think what we have right now at the end of the doc is very limited. So I would prefer to have sort of a table with, not just which event sources are you supporting and are you open source, but all sorts of attributes that we can find.
So I was definitely hearing some concern about the doc or putting something like this into the white paper because it's going to be stale immediately, going to be out of date, could be misleading to people as things are rapidly changing. Does putting this into some sort of Google Doc spreadsheet thing where it's implied it's supposed to be a sort of a living doc, does that soften anybody's opinion as to whether we should do something similar to what Chris has listed here for the storage guys?
Yeah, I'm still a little concerned that wouldn't be kept up to date. I think,
but it's the ownership of the project managers to update their stuff. If they don't want to look bad, they need to update it.
It's surprisingly worked well from our different, not only the CNCF landscape diagram that's been a bit of an entertaining thing to deal with, but you'd be surprised how many vendors and folks want to make sure their stuff is up to date on that list. And same goes with the storage thing. It kind of acts as a forcing function because it is somewhat of a diagram people go to kind of learn what's going on. So I don't think we'll have trouble actually keeping it up to date, to be honest.
Okay.
They'll put the email webhooks on those documents to make sure no one changes them.
I mean, we have trouble keeping up with the updates sometimes on the bigger landscape diagram.
Yeah. Okay. So if that's the case, I think that's definitely a better place than the white paper, right? So that's more of a static document, unless we did make. Sorry, that's my cat back there. She knows when I'm on the calls. Yeah. So definitely better than in the white paper, I'd say.
Just to clarify, like the expectation would be that vendors should be sort of keeping references to themselves updated and so on.
Vendors or community members to police each other. We also find that competitors like to police each other to make sure that the information is up to date. So it's kind of this entertaining thing to kind of keep everyone honest.
Now, is that done strictly in Google Docs, or what about using Git instead? GitHub?
It depends on the working groups tend to just use Google Sheets, and that tends to work out pretty well. The bigger landscape diagram is controlled by the foundation itself, Dan and I.
Okay, so is there any objection to at least trying that and seeing how that plays out?
Sounds pretty reasonable.
Okay. So I can take a first stab at trying to put something together. I'm going to need lots of help filling it out, but I can at least put together the framework for it. And so I'll take that action item.
Can we exchange maybe in Slack or somewhere else? So what are the categories we want to build into that doc?
Yeah. Feel free to just put a list into the Slack, and I'll pick it up later. I don't necessarily want to take time on the call at this exact moment, though.
Yeah, I think it's important like what kind of attributes we should put into that spreadsheet to do the comparison. Like for example, we might need some latency, language support, something like that.
Yeah. So just go ahead and drop it into, I guess, into our Slack channel, and I'll pick it up.
Another interesting thing would be performance benchmarking, if we want to put any of that, or have someone independent.
That might be interesting.
Yeah.
All right. So moving on then, I think we got that one done. Thank you, guys. So what I wanted to do was, I know there's still several comments in the doc, but there was one section in particular that I wanted to call out because I thought it might be worth having an extended discussion on it. And for better or worse, Chris Munns, I picked on your section, the FAS versus serverless discussion in the doc, because that seemed to be going back and forth a bit. I was wondering whether you think that might be worthy of discussion on this call here, or do you think it's handled appropriately through the comments and nothing needs to be discussed at a broader level?
I'll leave it up to the group. I mean, I think, going back a couple of weeks ago, I volunteered that I would write out what I could based on kind of, the loose viewpoint that I have based on my employer and trying to make it, a vendor neutral thing. It does create a box. It does mean that some things are in the box, some things are out of the box. I think it's good to have bounds to a definition. So, I mean, I'm open to discussion with folks, obviously open to hear what people want to suggest instead of it. But I do think it's good for us to have some firm guidelines as to, again, what fits in the box and what doesn't fit in that box.
Okay, so let's focus on your comment there about absolutely no cost when idle. Do you think Chris's comment back to you addresses it, or are you still looking for changes?
No, I think that it depends on what the customer wants. Even in Amazon, you could go and get a spot instance for a VM, or you could go and provision stuff up front. For some applications, which are latency sensitive, that don't want to wait 200 or to a second, milliseconds to a second, a customer may just say, yeah, I want this function, I'm willing to pay a bit more, and I want this function to be warm and ready. So I don't think it's part of the definitions, because if there is, and especially we see use cases for that in more real-time applications, and the customer obviously is willing to pay more. So I'm not going to call it serverless just because it's willing to pay more and keep it warm.
So what if we were to soften a little and say, instead of absolutely no cost, say maybe something along the lines of can be no cost when idle, kind of a thing? Soften it so it's, to be clear, it's optional.
I think it's just an aspect of what you're getting. Like, there is always a cost, whether the customer or whether the user's the one that's sort of paying for it, sort of upfront, I think is maybe the question. There's the cost is, your trade-off between sort of how responsive you want the function to be, whether you're paying to sort of keep sort of containers or whatever running in the background. I think it's not a clear-cut binary choice there.
I would wholeheartedly disagree again. I mean, it's when we look at kind of the space of what people have considered serverless here industry-wide, the no paying for idle is a key aspect of what draws people to these technologies. And I think the comments about, well, there's always someone paying for something, well, sure, but again, from the perspective of the consumer of the technology, from an organizational perspective, going from, hey, I run servers or I run instances or I run containers to, oh, I run nothing, but I have an application that works, irregardless of aspects like performance, because again, from the various cloud providers, the various serverless platform providers, I should say, out there, any one of us could be working on features that make cold starts a non-issue. And so I don't think I would write a definition that is respective of a current implementation.
That would suggest, that would kind of sort of, that would kind of sort of basically rule out anybody sort of hosting their own platforms to provide sort of like serverless capabilities across. Like, so if you're a large corporation and you maybe sort of have some capacity dedicated to providing this, the consumers within your organization maybe aren't seeing a direct cost, but the organization is. Yep.
I do spell that out in what I've defined here, and so I don't take it just from a developer's point of view. I say as a former operations guy who did rack and stack myself for many years. The idea that as an organization I have an application that doesn't require me to patch servers or use tools like Chef and Puppet or think about replacing hard drives or backing up that operating system or any of those types of things is a massive mind shift in terms of what you're spending your time on.
Yeah, Chris, that's all true, and we're in full agreement on that. But there is a disagreement on the sort of forcing a certain SLA when you're saying serverless. Right now, your latency is very high for some applications, so you're limiting the use case. So maybe Amazon doesn't want to go after those use cases that have 1 millisecond or less.
Yaron, you're taking your personal experience with a given product and defining it across the white paper, right? What I'm saying here is that this definition is meant to be broad and widely scoped so that it fits many different platforms, many different tools that meet these bounds. Don't take into account. So you're the one limiting.
I'm not limiting, Chris. I'm not limiting. I think your definition is limiting. Wherever I wrote, anything I wrote in the doc, I took a lot of examples from Amazon, from Azure, from most of the providers, and I tried to generalize. What you're doing is not generalizing, is limiting, and I'm trying to generalize. So if you're saying I'm limiting, it's sort of the other way around right now.
Well, I think what you're doing is you're using counterexamples from your experience with Lambda, which doesn't seem necessarily apt to what the
I'll
definition
send you
is
blog
around.
Posts of people pinging Lambda every 5 minutes.
And again, that's a customer-based decision. That's not something that would define a space in the industry for a group of technologies. Again, I think you're conflating the two things.
No one says serverless means that it has to be going to sleep. No one said that that's a definition. That's maybe your definition because it's convenient with your implementation. But
if
I
you
think
look,
that the customer
if you
that
look
wants
at Google, if you look at Microsoft, if you look at what IBM's done with their hosted OpenWhisk platform, everyone talks about not paying for idle being a key aspect and attractor to serverless. If you look at the people that
because
are
they're
doing,
going after limited use cases, and I'm bet with you. I'm willing to put a personal bet with you that once you'll start seeing those use cases of people trying to push Lambda into higher performance aspects and real-time aspects, you'll see that immediately you're going to jump and allow this level of SLA and any of those cloud providers. I'm willing to put a personal bet on that.
So let me ask a question, Chris, because I feel like I'm one of the more newbie guys here in this space, and so I just have a question. I know there are some serverless frameworks out there that don't go all the way down to 0 instances; they go down to 1, and so I think you would end up paying something because your application is just sitting there waiting for like an HTTP request to come in, right? It may be minimal, but it is still something there. Would you claim that their assertion that they're serverless is invalid then?
Yeah, because you're paying for idle. You're paying for something that you're not using.
Okay.
So that's disqualifying a lot of people, for what we've done in our solution. It's a customer can choose if he wants 0 or if he wants a higher number. Maybe even he wants 5, not even 1, just because he knows that a burst may be coming and he wants to be prepared and provide better SLA. So you're saying based on this decision that anyone that will make a choice of serving the customer needs for some new types of application is not serverless just because of this need.
So I'm trying to figure out a way to forward here because obviously I feel like there's a large gap between these two. Because, and I'm trying to figure out if there's some wording we can add to this that, I don't want to say softens it, but allows for perhaps an explanation of these different points of views. Or is this impossible because Chris, you're taking a very firm position, especially with the word absolutely. Is there any wiggle room here to add clarifying language that doesn't necessarily invalidate some of the implementations that are out there today that are serverless and people do claim are serverless?
Well, again, I think what we run into, and this is something we've seen in the industry for the last couple of years with terms like cloud and DevOps and big data and stuff like that, is that people are going to apply a term to a technology despite maybe what the rest of the industry sees it as. And so, I mean, this document can go a certain direction that it wants to. It may not align with what the major cloud providers or the major, Gartners and 451 researchers of the world do. That's fine. I think it just lends itself to, again, what is going to be the credibility of this document if it takes a stance that doesn't align with where, A, the major cloud providers are, as well as, again, where you see a lot of the other people in the industry going. I think I appreciate and can respect all of the work and everything else that people are doing for the self-hosted FAS products that exist. It's brilliant stuff, but I think to apply the term serverless to it is broad and kind of abusive of the term.
So we're in agreement on that. We're not talking about self-hosting. We're doing hosting, okay, fully hosted. Okay,
yep, but what I'm saying
one of our offerings. It's not about that.
When you get down
the question is about the 0. If I'm forced to put and not charge anything because I want to provide a certain SLA to a certain application. And I think, I've been sitting for a lot of committees and a lot of standardization bodies. And if there is server disagreement, you try to generalize. You're not trying to specify based on one's opinion in the community. So I think we need to soften the language. So maybe your point is very well taken, but it doesn't force people to agree with what you're saying.
So let me ask a question.
It sounds like it's describing a business model rather than a technology at this point. I don't think anybody thinks that there is absolutely 0 cost sort of somewhere along the chain. It may be the case that, sort of Amazon or Google sort of absorb the fact that they're paying maybe a micro amount for storing your tiny little piece of code, but it has cost at some place. And like whether you absorb it is more about a business model than a technology.
But the two are intertwined, right? We're talking about technology that specifically aligns to the benefits to its core consumers. And so I think to say that, because a series of vendors across the industry have a capability and do something behind the scenes, that doesn't impact the end customers drastically, that doesn't make any sense then to talk about this term as anything different from what's existed in cloud before it.
So would it be useful to maybe split this out and say, from an abstract definitional point of view, serverless means no cost when idle. However, in practice, because certain offerings or products, whatever you want to call them, may need to offer a certain level of SLA or whatever you want to call it, in practice, there actually may not ever get you down to a complete idle state. Therefore, your cost may actually not be zero, but that doesn't necessarily change sort of the abstract state of what serverless means from a definitional point of view. But if we phrased it that way, sort of split out reality from the ideal state of a definition perspective. Does that help at all?
If the question is to me, to Chris Munns, my answer is I still think that it is extending out beyond what one of the main reasons are that people look towards serverless technologies. And, the question around things like SLAs, that's actually more of a back-end implementation type of a thing versus it is a customer decision. And so I disagree that should be a factor. There's things that could happen behind the scenes that would make any SLA possible, hypothetically. That becomes a business decision.
Right, but what I think that does, though, is allows people then say, okay, I understand serverless should be zero cost on idle. However, when I go choose my particular provider, I need to pay attention because not everybody's going to be complete zero cost for whatever reason. And so that allows them to take that into account when they go to evaluate their particular hosting environment.
So if you get rid of that rule and you have the other rules, how do the other rules, in a sense, impact what becomes serverless? So you take away idle cost and you're left with a zero management platform for the end consumer. And then you're left with the instant scalability. Are we really saying that those things still apply the same way when you are paying for resources that you're not using?
Well, to be clear, I'm not saying remove the no cost. What I'm saying is split that number 2 item into sort of dream state of serverless in a perfect world should be zero cost. But in reality, not everybody can or will offer that. And so you need to take that into account when you make your hosting choice.
I'd argue then that becomes not serverless. That becomes some other model. That becomes another model for functions as a service.
So let me ask you a different question then. Because I know that a lot of people who use Lambda, for example, I think Yaron mentioned this, will occasionally ping their stuff so they never actually get down to zero, right? Does that mean that they're not using your serverless technology in a serverless way?
No, it means that Amazon absorbs the cost. You're saying, so it's a business model decision of Amazon of absorbing the cost of someone sort of abusing their service, and someone else may not want to have someone abuses business model. It's a business thing. It's not a technology thing because you do keep the resources up in those cases.
But as a customer, you have no knowledge, concern, or caring about that.
Of course you have knowledge. Look at the millions of blog posts about it. Of course you have knowledge.
That's a bit exaggerated and a bit dramatic. And I can say, given the viewpoint that I have of the entirety of Lambda running globally, that a very small percentage of customers ever do this. So again, let's not go back to what Lambda has to do. Let's look across the industry at all of the major serverless platforms that exist out there, and you see them all talking about the need for you not to pay for idle resources. This goes far beyond Lambda, and it goes into even things like some of the backend as a service providers or the DB as a service providers, that the lack of paying for resources is one of the key aspects, one of the key drivers of people towards this technology.
Okay, so I think what I'm going to do here is, I don't think we're going to come to a decision on this call right now, but I do think this is something we probably need to hash through before the white paper is finished. So I'm going to try to start either an email thread or something within the doc here through comments and to see if we can come to some sort of resolution here. I'm going to stop at that.
If I could real quick, I'd personally love to see some feedback from some of the other vendors in the space that are part of the working group here. So I know there are folks from both Google and Microsoft involved, as well as IBM. I would be very surprised if they strongly disagreed with the way that this is being defined. But again, the working group does what the working group wants to do as a whole. But I do think, though, that we want to be cautious about having too broad of a definition that, again, it waters down kind of the overall value of what we're trying to define.
Yep, I understand what you're saying. I just don't want to eat up the entire call with this because I do want to at least get to the conclusion section, and we only have 10 minutes left. So we will continue this discussion through some of the means, if nothing else, next week's call. But I think it is something we have to resolve. So what I'd like to do in the last 10 minutes is talk about the conclusion section. And let me copy the link and paste it into the chat. Hold on. So there's the conclusion section. What I wanted to do was, so over the last day or so, I put together a rough draft of what a conclusion section may look like. I tried to distill out what I've heard from other people, people had written in this section before in terms of ideas, and I wanted to put it out there for people to look at, review, and throw stones at. But I wanted to draw people's attention to it because I do think this is obviously one of the more important sections of the doc. So let me give you a minute just to quickly look it over and see if there are any high-level points about this, whether people think it's going the wrong direction, missing something major, mentioning the wrong things, just something at a high level, not necessarily wordsmithed on the call here. So I'll give you guys just a minute or two to look through it. Okay, any comments? I'm not sure how to interpret silence. Either way wrong or okay.
The doc probably, I think, we need some time to think about this and then give comments offline.
Okay. Yeah, obviously, yeah, I wasn't going to try to ram it down everybody's throat right now. I just wanted to see if there's anything that jumped out as just, Doug, you're so far off, don't even bother writing another word of text in here again, kind of thing. So, okay, so tell you what, why don't we take your time to review it. Like I said, my main purpose here is just to bring it up to make sure people are aware that something is now in there that I want reviews on. And that's actually it for the agenda today. Are there other topics people would like to bring up? I mean, if not, we can go back for the last 8 minutes and rehash the idle stuff we want to do.
I have a question regarding the this conclusion section. It mentioned, so it encouraged more serverless technology to join the CNCF, right? For example, some project listed in the open source serverless section. So if there are new open source projects, it should be added to that section, right?
That would be the hope, yes.
Okay, I see. But now the document is only, so how should that be done? How could people add to that section?
Right. So one of the, well, when we say add to it, do you mean before we say we're done or after we're done? I'm assuming you mean after we're done, right?
Yeah, or in the middle. Like, so when will this document be done?
Right. Well, whenever we claim it's done, hopefully within the next couple of weeks. But one of the things we've talked about is potentially taking this document and putting it in the GitHub repo for CNCF as markdown documents. That way, it can be more of a living document. So as new open source projects are created, people can issue a pull request to update that particular section. And in particular, split this document out into separate documents inside the GitHub repo. That way, it's more easily consumed. So that's one thing we have talked about offline.
Okay, that sounds good. But before it's done, like in the next few weeks, right, we should be able to add new open source project if we see some, if there's some. Okay.
Yes, definitely. And again, I'll say this again. I know I'm becoming a broken record, but please, if you'd like to add something to the doc or you want to make textual changes, do not make a comment. Add the actual text itself to the document as a suggestion. That way people can know exactly what you want to see added, and we don't have to go back and forth about the exact wording that you're looking for. Just add it straight in there, and then people can accept it or reject it based upon that. It makes the reviews go a whole lot faster. Okay?
Okay.
All right, about 5 minutes left. Any other topics people want to bring up? Okay, in that case, just the action item, I'll work on starting that the spreadsheet using the sample that Chris provided. I'll also start some sort of offline conversation about that zero cost for idle stuff. And then the action item for everybody else to review the conclusion section. And of course, if there are comments or edits to your section of the document, please try to address those as quickly as possible. If you've addressed the comment, go ahead and mark it as resolved so it gets deleted from the document. I'd like to try to get us down to 0 comments in the doc as soon as possible and only deal with, actual textual edits at that point. All right, last chance. Any topics, questions, comments? All right, cool. Thank you guys very much. We'll talk again next week.
Thank you.
Okay, bye guys.
Bye.
Bye.